Well, hello again. Julie and I are back to tell you more about the F-35 basing process story. I'm Colonel Rosanne Greco, live in South Burlington, have been active in opposing the basing of the F-35 since the year 2012. And here my right-hand, left-hand gal is...
I'm Julie Macuga. I live here in Burlington, and I've been similarly working on and researching this issue since 2017,
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, time flies.
Yeah, so we've been at this for a long time, and we're here to share with you some more, for lack of a better term, juicy stories about the Vermont Air National Guard today.
Yeah, so I think you're going to find out even more today than you have known in the past. For those of you who are just tuning in, our first episode, we talked about some of the basics of the F-35 basing, and the key to that was the whole process was flawed, manipulated, and I believe unethical. In our second episode, Julie and I talked about and read from Air Force official documents citing Senator Patrick Leahy's intense and repeated and consistent involvement in the basing process. And today we're going to talk about the Vermont National Guard's involvement, manipulation, behaviors, and actions in the basing process and the culture that I think is important for us to know about, considering these people are the ones that are running an organization that has a nuclear delivery vehicle, and some of them may be flying it. And maybe next time we might be talking about the nuclear role of the F-35. So.
Yes.
So we thought that probably it's good to start at the very beginning. And the foundation for the F-35 basing came from information that was false, and that information came from the Vermont National Guard. I'll give you a little detail about the structure of that and how we know that. But from the very beginning, the Vermont National Guard was primarily responsible for providing the Air Force with information upon which they then went forward to conduct detailed examination of the Burlington area for the F-35. And the information in many areas, which we'll point out, was blatantly incorrect, and from the official records, it would certainly appear it was deliberately falsified.
Right. So in short, the information on which this basing happened was falsified from the very start, both from, as we've mentioned before, Senator Leahy's involvement and the Vermont Air National Guard, who are also, again, the people who are maintaining, flying, operating this basing.
Right. So it is a detailed and rather lengthy process, but I'm going to try to shorten and summarize it. So the Air Force has been, they base aircraft all around the United States and the world. And they had been criticized in years past for not being transparent about why they selected base A over base B. So they came up with a way, and they wrote a paper on it, and we read about this, in order to show the public that the decisions they are making are based in fact, and there is some subjective parts of it, but for the vast majority is based on data about the base and its ability to host the aircraft.
Right.
So they put together a scoring sheet. And we've learned through having the official documents of the Air Force, and this is after the basing process, the decision was made, that there were a number of scoring sheets that were put together. We only found out years later that the scoring sheets that were originally put together and the scoring sheet that eventually was released to the public were dramatically different. We may or may not be able to go into the details of that now, but that is very significant, that things could change dramatically in the space of a few months or a year. But let's cut to the scoring sheet that was released to us early on in the process. By the way, the Air Force decided no longer to release those scoring sheets. We read in one of their emails that was a mistake to make the public, to release those to the public. So let me, just in brief, and I'll hold this up to the camera. You'll not be able to read it, but it is on our website, all right? So I don't know if you can see this. So this is the scoring sheet that was released to the public. And there, accompanying it was a 4 or 5 page, what the Air Force called a position paper, a background paper, that explained each of the areas on here that had to be scored. Right. There were 4 major categories: mission, capacity, environmental, and cost. Right? And then there were scores given to subcategories under all of them. And then supposedly, the base with the highest score would obviously rise to the top and would be the one that would be considered seriously for the basing. So we found out, back up a little bit, that in previous scoring sheets, and I'll show you one, and if you're not able to read this now, but at the bottom line here, you'll see there are 6 bases across the top. 3 are active duty Air Force bases. We're never in competition with them. And then the 3 were the Guard bases. 1 in Jacksonville, Florida, 1 in McIntyre in South Carolina, and then Burlington. And on this basing sheet, Burlington scored the lowest of the other 2 bases. Fast forward just another year later, or this scoring sheet came out, and Burlington scored the highest. When we received this sheet, excuse me, I think it's a bit water. A little dry. I don't know, Julie, maybe you could talk.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah, no worries. So
discuss something.
Yes, sure. So again, all of this information for all these score sheets we found out later is coming from the Vermont National Guard. You will find colorful characters such as, well, I kind of like referring to them as their call signs. We've got Chris Caputo or Pooter, we've got Jackman or Snatch, we've got a Boneman, we've got Snot. There's a lot of interesting folks in there, which I can't wait to get into their exploits later that are sort of happening concurrently with this scoring process. But basically, these are the folks that are providing the information to the Air Force, who is just, the Air Force is just assuming, okay, they're not going to lie to us about this. Right. And here's what they wrote.
So when we got the scoring sheet, and I read through it, there were 2 areas I since went through in more detail and found actually more than 2, that on the face of it were blatantly wrong. I'll use vernacular as opposed to the military way of saying things. So the first thing that just jumped out was basically the question. It was a yes or no answer. Are there any buildings in the noise zone? And the answer that the Vermont Air National Guard told the Air Force was no. There are no buildings in the noise zone. In fact, there were about 1,500 buildings in the noise zone. So looking at this, it was very clear in my naivete early on that that was a mistake. Certainly they had clicked the wrong box, perhaps, right? The second thing that was a bit harder to reconcile was the fact that Burlington, Vermont got the highest score for cloud-free days. That was under weather. We were in competition with Florida and South Carolina. Go figure, folks, that somehow the Vermont Air National Guard told the Air Force, and the Air Force believed them, that we had sunnier weather and more cloud-free days in Vermont than they do in Florida and South Carolina.
Well, we were just saying, I think the last time we saw the sun was yesterday, which was the first time in perhaps weeks, and we're going up against the literal sunshine state.
We pity the people in South Carolina and Florida that are darker than we are, but we jest. Anyway, it was very clear that something had dramatically gone wrong here. And early on, I, having served in the military for 30 years, I trust military members, and I thought, surely something must have hiccuped here. No. How I know that is that when I got the scoring sheet at the time, back 2012, I guess-ish, I came out publicly saying, wait, the Air Force had not yet made their decision to base it in Burlington. And so I was trying to say, whoa, hold off. You're using the basis for your decision is false. You hold on. Go back and look at this. So that got the attention of Kathleen Ferguson, who was at that time the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Logistics. And I got a call from one of her staffers saying she wanted to speak to me about my public comments about this scoring sheet. And so we had a conversation. And in that conversation, she told me, I have nothing in writing, this was a phone conversation, that the information that is on this scoring sheet was not something that the Air Force put together. It's something that the Vermont National Guard put together. And she said to me, that's how we did it. We sent out this sheet to all of the bases, and initially they went out to 205 bases across the United States. And all the bases were required to fill out this sheet, and then they culled them, and the ones that rose to the top, the one with the highest scores came to the top. And so she said to me, we had no reason to doubt that that information was not accurate. Why would you doubt that your members of the military and the Guard would put incorrect information on it? What she was saying to me is not our fault. Right. We didn't do it. We, the Air Force, did not do this. The Guard did it, and we believe them, as, you trust your military comrades. So when I heard that, I said, okay, once again, I'm still thinking maybe it was a mistake. I'm giving every benefit of the doubt. I no longer think it was a mistake. And I said, okay, regardless of who put the information out, it's wrong. Could you go back and correct it and then alter the scores and then see where Burlington falls? And she said, no, it's too late for that. We're already down the road. And we're not going to go back and start from scratch again. So she refused. And then I said to her one more thing. I said, okay, if you're not going to do that, would you please let the senior leadership, and she was a senior leader, but she wasn't the SINC, the head of the Air Force, would you please let them know, the decision maker, that there was bad information to start? And she said no. It was at that point that I thought my, belief in the integrity of some military members may have been misplaced. One last thing about scoring sheets before we move on to the Guard. Well, this is all about the Guard, but so about a year later, maybe 2 years later, Burlington was being considered for another aircraft. This was before the basing decision was made for the F-35. It was a KC-46, not a jet, not a fighter aircraft. It's a cargo transport tanker kind of aircraft. And they did a scoring sheet for that. And somehow, I don't know how, but somehow I found out how that scoring sheet differed dramatically from the F-35. Burlington scored the lowest on that. Our congressional delegation heard of that, and we read in emails they were very worried that that information would get out to the public. Because in the space of a year, you have a scoring sheet for one air basing option that says Burlington's the highest of the bases being considered, and then the same base is the lowest, right? So the congressional delegation, Leahy, Sanders, and Welsh, contacted the Air Force to say what happened. But we read in emails, they were little interested in what happened, more interested that it didn't get into the public eye. And so the document that we read, that we found in the records, is from the Air Force explaining to our congressional delegation why this basing score sheet was so different from the F-35. And what they said was, to cut to the chase in simple terms, we actually used the actual data to score the base for the KC-46. In other words, we know exactly, the weather, the capacity, the mission, the cost. But when we did the F-35, it was conjecture. We were, they don't say the word spitball in it, but they were not actually using actual data. They were guessing, making maybe educated guesses. Right. All right? So that's telling you right there on black and white that they made mistakes, that the basing sheet that started the whole basing process in Burlington was wrong. Okay, so that's it for the scoring sheet. Now, Julie is going to talk to you about the Vermont National Guard.
Yeah, so continuing on this theme of the Guard falsifying data, lying, we get into things like intimidation and coercion and all of those kinds of things. So again, we're going back to the administrative record, that set of thousands and thousands of documents that we peeled through to try to figure out what had happened with this basing. And there's a ton of stuff in here about times that the Guard got involved. And my understanding is that both for the EIS process and for electioneering and political circumstances, the Guard really should have had pretty much no involvement. Mm-hmm. But there were dozens and dozens of times where they're behind the scenes talking about the city council meetings, calling us ignorant SOBs, things like that. Mm-hmm. And so I'll just share with you a few. I'm going to be paraphrasing a bit. I can send the documentation if anyone would like it. But I'm just going to share a couple of things that we found. Let me just find the first one here. Yeah, there's these internal documents. I believe this one was between two Air Force officials telling each other that efforts to institute or participate in any way we support the F-35 campaign by way of petition or active participation in efforts toward those means would be improper. Military organization are prohibited from solicitation. If we appear to be actively soliciting behind-the-scenes activists towards these means, we could impact our credibility with those who we are already on shaky grounds with. And it's worth noting that the rest of this document is redacted. So, and they're referring to, again, these folks, namely a man named Christopher Caputo, call sign Pooter, who at various points throughout this is, writing the data, sending that to the Air Force, getting involved with Senator Leahy's staffers. You have people at the Air Force saying, why is Caputo throwing a tantrum about these noise contours and things like that? And so a couple of examples of that, this is going to be a little bit jargony, but there's something called Carnes 3. It's a noise modeling software that helps, I believe it helps them to figure out what the noise contours were going to look like, who was going to be impacted, those 13 or 1,500 houses that I will say definitely do exist. So you have Caputo and Brzezinski and I believe Finnegan at some point, all senior members of VTANG, Cray,
Adjutant General Cray.
yes, they're all talking directly to the contractors, to people at Lockheed Martin, to Senator Leahy's staff, saying we need to use this noise modeling that no other base is using because it makes Burlington, it artificially inflates Burlington's numbers and makes us look better. And there are just dozens of emails about this. And the Air Force, meanwhile, in the background is saying, why are they doing this? We didn't use this for any of the other bases. This is a waste of time. Like, this is, yeah. So this goes on for a while. And then there's all these pieces where, again, namely Christopher Caputo is trying to sort of game the system where they're told, you know, you have to fly the way that the rest of the F-35s are going to fly. You can't just, you know, do a reduced fuel load or, you know, not fly with afterburner. You have to fly the way that you're going to fight if you are going to fight. And so they're trying to sort of rig things where at Burlington they're saying we're going to use afterburner 1% of the time. Afterburner being a component that makes this much, much louder than it already is. And so they're saying, you know, we're going to fly at these different angles that are not necessarily recommended. We're considering if we come into an emergency, we're going to just dump fuel all over the place or go land in Plattsburgh instead. And meanwhile, again, the Air Force behind the scenes is just like, what are they talking about? Like, that doesn't... So that was the second piece. And I'll just throw in another little quote here. This is Engelman to another Air Force.
She's an Air Force senior civilian.
Yeah, to another Air Force official saying, we need documentation to document assumption that we were used to deflect criticism from Caputo. I don't need him calling the guard two-star and having him challenge the work with Miss Ferguson. If fuel and full munitions is not a big issue for power settings, then why did Caputo have a fit over it and complain about how that would increase noise? Do you have anything to add? I'm going to keep looking.
So I think Julie said it very well. I'm just going to read you little snippets just to give you an idea. Once again, these are for the vast majority, from emails that Caputo sent out, right? Just things he said. And as Julie just explained, they were not supposed to do this. The Vermont Guard was not supposed to be involved in the basing process, yet they were intensely involved. In particular, some of the people we talked about, in particular Caputo and Finnegan and Adjutant General Cray and some others. And Caputo was making trips to visit Lockheed Martin and other subcontractors. And while he was doing this, we read in emails that the Air Force, as Julie just said, was complaining about the Guard's involvement. But they were also, more than complaining, they were concerned about what the Guard was doing and what the Guard was proposing to do that they considered, as Julie just saying, you know, well, they were proposing to fly the plane as it was not designed to fly. And the Air Force was concerned that could cause a mishap or a crash. And then Caputo's coming back, well, we'll just dump the fuel. Right. You know, we'll just land in Plattsburgh. But anyway, here's some of the just words from Caputo. So, and I'm starting with back in 2010 to show you the involvement, because they didn't make the decision until 2013, right? Anyway, he's saying things like he's requesting a few more weeks to work the issue prior to sending a letter from Senator Leahy to the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. All right, this is Caputo's words, right? Caputo is now writing to General Cray, the Adjutant General. So he's praising himself, saying there's significant improvements as a result of our inputs, right? And the modification, this is quotes, the modification we demanded to this noise profile that Julie just mentioned. To accommodate our local noise abatement procedures, again, I'm confident these numbers, meaning he's talking about the decibel number, will decrease even more. He wasn't confident, he wasn't talking about the actual decibels decreasing. He was confident that the tool would show a lower number of decibels than actually we would hear. They knew this from the very beginning. They were just trying to get the data to show to the public it's not going to be bad, right? Anyway, here's another one from Caputo to Clark. This one again, he feels like he may be stepping too far. Right? He's saying, I don't want to make any additional requests. And these are from some of the subcontractors. But Major General Cray and Colonel Brzezinski, I think I mispronounced that, have been working the issue with senior leaders in the Air National Guard, that's the ones in the Pentagon, the Air Combat Command, that's in Virginia, and Congress. So it gives you an idea. The Guard had their hands and fingers and toes and bodies just about everywhere. Okay, Caputo talks again about, we can try this. Oh, we can try this. Then Caputo says again, now we're up to 2012, we may need to get Senator Leahy involved and have his office call Senator so-and-so. I'm just leaving little snippets here. And here's another one. Here's this Finnegan. He's the commander now over there. So he's talking about how some of the data is not looking so good, even though they were successful in getting this new noise model. And he's advocating that it not be in the EIS. He says it doesn't, this is Finnegan, it doesn't need to be shown in the EIS. So he's trying to hide information from the public, right? And then the last one from Caputo that we have on our list. There's lots more, folks. And
this is not the only time that they withhold data from the public. There's a couple of emails where they blatantly say, oh yeah, the public doesn't need to know about this.
But here's the part for those of us who are hearing the Guard saying now they're going to take off an afterburner and somehow that's going to reduce the noise. All right, I don't know, they must think we're insane. But they're talking now, and this is October of 2013, right? And they're talking, this is Caputo again, to another Guard person, Harris, and he's talking about his discussions and work with Lockheed Martin. And they're trying to try all these different things to see how the noise would be. And he says, because at this time, I think we started talking about afterburners locally and what that would mean for the decibel level, because the decibel level in the EIS did not consider afterburners. That was military power. He says, this is a quote from good old Caputo, "There's nothing that is going to drive us to use afterburners to take off." The reason he's saying that is because the Air Force said they would need to use afterburners to take off. One, from a mission perspective, they have to see how they have to fly as they are going to fight. But also the reality is, as the aircraft gets heavier, the laws of physics mean they're going to have to use afterburners to get off the ground, right? So he's guaranteeing, even though the Air Force says in other places, up to 60 to 90% of the takeoffs are an afterburner, Caputo is saying, nah, in Burlington, it's not going to be that way, even though Burlington's runway is way shorter than these other runways. And if you don't understand that, you got to there's less ground, and you don't have the option to use more ground because it's not there. Anyway, nothing is going to drive us to use afterburners. Then he said, there are some concerns with an emergency landing immediately after takeoff on a wet runway. And he's talking about that. But he said, then goes, but we can easily mitigate that by using, and this is what we're talking about, the fuel dump option, the hook, or the emergency landing in Plattsburgh. This is all quotes. Not information we need to share with the public at this time, right?
Right.
Okay, so.
And I think with our remaining time, it's worth getting into just a little bit of the culture that was happening at the Guard simultaneously. There was an excellent series in Vermont Digger by someone named Jasper Craven called The Flying Fraternity that, if you're interested in this, you should definitely read. But basically, during this, 2010 to I don't know, 2014, 2015 time period, a lot of these actors that we've been talking about are also involved in these really scandalous things. We've got Caputo getting discharged because while he's in command of I'm forgetting the right term, squadron, platoon, whatever.
Squadron.
While he's in charge of this squadron that's overseas in Djibouti, they're breaking regulation to go off base in a place where the sex trade is really active, to go drinking and spending hundreds of dollars on booze. And back home, they also have these exclusive boys clubs where they're drinking all this beer, and it's like a whole no girls allowed kind of vibe. Truly, and there's a lot of intimidation and threats coming from these folks, and there's no repercussions. And in fact, Caputo and another person from the time in Djibouti I'm not sure if they still are in the running for this, but were poised to become F-35 pilots after this. And I think it's also maybe worth talking about Jackman, who is close to all of these. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
So I don't know how much time we have left, but there is so much information that the investigative reporter, Jasper Craven, did on the Vermont National Guard. It is overwhelming. He did a number of series. He did a number of reports. The one that Julie is just talking about was a 7-part series, and it was titled The Flying Fraternity. He did another series before that, months before, I think was a 5-part series that was called Rough Landing. And you read in there, in some of these, it touched on the F-35, but it was really about the behaviors, the culture, the toxic environment that existed in the Vermont Guard, and we read later on even some in the Army Guard, but the Flying Fraternity was all about the Air Guard. I don't know if the word shocking is appropriate for this, but it is overwhelming. Yes. And Jasper Craven cites references and documents, official records and stuff, and as well as statements from individuals, some of whom gave their name, many of whom, especially if they were a junior in rank, did not, because there was definitely a good old boys culture in the worst way possible. They had their own exclusive club where they would drink alcohol, where the implication was it was really for the pilots, not for anybody else. Certainly not, for enlisted people or for women, right? And in that club, they talk about people falling down drunk, DUIs were almost routinely. Those of you who were in the area, this goes back maybe 10 or so years ago, there was an incident when an Air Guard pilot crashed his plane on one of the little islands out on Lake Champlain, and then he fled, and the speculation was that he was drunk. A whistleblower came forward to talk about that sometimes the pilots took flasks of alcohol up with them in their cockpit. There, as Julie mentioned, Lieutenant Colonel Caputo, who was subsequently promoted, was arrested when he was in a foreign country for violating Air Force rules and regulations about going off base, going to certain establishments, using government vehicles, drinking. He got a non-judicial punishment. It's called an Article 15. And in my time in the military, an officer getting an Article 15 was the end of their career, without a doubt. But what we see happening in the Vermont Air Guard is that the good old boys, the senior leadership, protected each other. They didn't receive any reprimands, I mean, a slap on the wrist, and then his record, I think, was expunged, and actually got rewarded. I don't know. Do we have time to talk about Jackman now, or do we?
I think a good summation of all of this would be to talk briefly about something that I think encapsulates the culture at the Guard, and going back to, you know, in our naivete when we were first doing this research, thinking, oh, well, they wouldn't lie to us. We can trust the Guard. There's just this very repeated and pervasive culture of protecting their own at the cost of people that are below them in the ranks. The one person that we ever saw get reprimanded for anything was the person who was trying to protect, namely women, from sexual assault that was happening at the Guard. And he was discharged, lost all of his benefits. As far as we know, he's still fighting for those benefits, and the high-ups at the Vermont Air National Guard threatened to, quote, break his fucking fingers if he said anything about certain aspects of what was going on at VTANG. And I mean, and not to leave out Jackman, another person who was deeply involved.
Yeah, let's stay with Caputo for a moment here, because there were a number of reported incidents on Caputo being aggressive to members of the public. There were police complaints filed against him, at least 2 that we read about, that he lost his temper, was uncontrolled, and threatened some members of the public. It was over F-35 stuff. There was even something that smacks of something that we just experienced at the national level. V.T. Digger covered a lot of this at the time. Other media did too, but Digger probably did more than any other public media. And the Guard barred them from coming to press conferences. When I read that, I'd forgotten that had happened. And Ann Galloway, who was the head of V.T. Digger at the time, tried to explain, much like we're hearing other news outlets here trying to explain, it is our job to tell the truth, whether that's positive or negative. We're just reporting what happened. And they were barred from coming when the Guard held a number of press conferences to try to refute the findings that Jasper Craven had written about in his report. And then it's full of it. It didn't happen, nothing here, no sexual harassment, nothing to see here. And then because V.T. Digger reported it, they were not allowed in. So I had forgotten about that. But what we're trying to convey is how our Vermont senior leaders, please, this is not the rank and file. These are the senior leaders, past and some of them still around, how they behaved. Not just with the F-35 basing. That's how we started to get involved in this, and then found the lies and the manipulation, the falsification, the unethical behavior. Then we learn about what's happening inside the Guard confines, which none of us were aware of. It started to come out. Most people that Jasper interviewed did not want their names associated with this because of the reprisals, and many women were quoted in the articles as saying, I believe I was not promoted because I wouldn't put out.
Right.
You know, I mean, they claimed that when they went TDY, temporary duty, I won't use the word, but it was a sin bin, you know, a fest of adultery, and it was a free-for-all.
Right.
Yeah.
Jackman, one of the higher-ups, took an F-16 to go visit a lover during a snowstorm. And at the time, he was also married, I believe.
Oh, he's married. Yeah. And she was married too. But anyway, I think she was married. Yes. So, but that. So Yeah, Jackman.
I think what you're trying to say.
I don't know if we have time for Jackman.
If you don't mind.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Basically, what we want to say is that the same people who are doing this kind of behavior repeatedly over and over again are the same people that are writing this data that's going to the Air Force, are the same people that are potentially going to be flying this aircraft. Yeah. And I hope we've painted a picture that just proves none of them are, at least the senior officials that we've mentioned, there's no way we can trust them with a single-seater nuclear weapons delivery device.
Yeah. Judgment is a key factor that the military talks about a lot as what you are evaluated on and rated on whether you would make a good senior leader. I mean, there's lots of other things, capability but your character and your integrity. I mean, that's some of the three mottos of the Air Force. You know, integrity, mission. I won't go into them now, but integrity and your character and your judgment, especially when you're talking about deploying weapons. I mean, you need good judgment in all things, right? But as Julie mentioned, the F-35. And I think we'll talk about this next time. Mm-hmm. The F-35 is a single-seater. One human being is on board. There's no room for anybody else. And it is designed to carry nuclear weapons, 2 of them. And when you have a single individual, and there are controls, and we can't go too much into the right now, but you have to have full confidence that the person in that cockpit is sober, sane, and a good judge of what needs to be done, follow orders, et cetera, et cetera. Given what we have learned about some of the people in senior positions in the Vermont Guard, I would be scared. I would be really concerned. These are the kinds of individuals that are in the cockpit with a aircraft that carries nuclear weapons.
But more on that next time.
More on that next time, and I have no idea how much time we have. Next time we need a sort of a countdown clock. But
we'll also include, I think, Rosanne's email.
Yes. So what we thought was, for those of you who are maybe listening to some of this is our third, all right? If you have any questions, or you'd like more information, or we said something you didn't understand, or there's something you really want to know about, we don't know everything, but there's a lot we do know, send me an email. And I think they're going to put it up somewhere. But my email is my first name, Rosanne, Rosanne, 05403, which is a zip code for South Burlington, at AOL.com. And do not make a snarky eye roll on AOL. Anyway, I've had it since the 1990s, and I'm not giving it up. So Rosanne, 05403 at AOL.com. So if you have any questions or comments or suggestions, send them to me, and we will incorporate them in future shows. But we're thinking right now that our next show will talk about the nuclear role of the F-35, the weapon it has been designed to carry, what the Pentagon says about that, and where we stand with the F-35 and its nuclear role. And we'll maybe talk about nuclear war if you want. That used to be part of what I did when I was on active duty. I specialized in nuclear weapons. So I'm going to say goodbye to y'all. Julie, do you have any parting words?
No, I think that's it. Stay tuned. We have a lot more. Yeah, and I would, again, highly recommend reading The Flying Fraternity by Jasper Craven.
Very good. Yeah, yeah.
Excellent pieces about just how pervasive this toxic culture is.
Right, yeah. I hope it's still online somewhere.
It is.
It is, okay. Yeah, I mean, if you want to read a little Peyton's Place of Burlington, Vermont, X-rated, you might want to read The Flying Fraternity. So, once again, we enjoy, well, I don't know if we enjoy, okay. It is, I think, a privilege to be able to share this information with you all.
CCTV,
right, because I think the truth,
17.
and thank you to CCTV, the truth is the truth, the facts are the facts. The fact that some people deny them. We know this is going on everywhere. Does not make them less true or less factual. So until next time, next month, happy St. Patrick's Day, I guess, is coming up. Maybe Easter before we next see y'all. So send in your comments, questions, and suggestions.
Yeah. Take care.